So thanks everyone for joining our second event for Leeds Digital Festival. We'll be talking software delivery assessment today. And we have our special guest, Matthew Skelton, who will be talking about it. Just a bit of introduction about Matthew, and then I'll move on to the other people on the panel. So Matthew Skelton is the co-author of Team Topologies and also the founder of Conflux Consultancy, where he offers training and consulting to organizations, helping them build and run software systems. Matthew specializes in continuous delivery, operability, and organization dynamics, and was recognized by Tech Beacon as one of the top 100 people to know in DevOps. Matthew created the software delivery assessment model, which we'll talk about today. And this model essentially is actually quite an effective approach to assessing your software across many different teams in your organization. So scaling something like this is a key feature of his model. So Matthew will be talking about this model. We've asked him questions around, how he came up with this model, when did he first introduce it, and how it was taken. So Matthew will be giving us a session on that. We also have Simon Gibbs, who's been speaking earlier from Agile Stationery. Simon will be introducing the card deck, the software delivery assessment card deck, which you see on your screen right now. And basically, we work with Matthew to put together this deck of cards, which are based on the themes from his model. And basically, it's actually quite a great way to learn and apply the model quickly and effectively in your teams. It's basically making his model very accessible and for you to try out with your teams.
It was a pleasure to do that piece of work.
Finally, I want to also introduce Benedict Steele. Ben's from the consultancy Arma Cooney, and Ben will share his insights and, more importantly, practical insights of how he applies this model currently with his clients to bring about, I think very important to mention here, cultural transformations in the organizations that he works with. So Ben, you will be talking about sort of practical insights, case studies, and basically feedback on Matthew's model. So welcome, Ben. Yes, let's kick off our session. As promised, Matthew is going to kick off, and we have this session from him coming up next.
Hi, Leeds Digital Festival 2020. I'm thrilled to be part of this session with Agile Stationery. I'm Matthew Skelton from Conflux, and I put together the Multiteam software delivery assessment back in 2019 to help organizations develop and evolve the capability to self-assess their own software delivery capabilities. So the software delivery assessment is based on principles and ideas from several well-respected books across lots of different dimensions of software delivery, and it's Creative Commons share alike. It's on GitHub, so it's free to use and adapt. In a minute, I'll show you this amazing card deck from Agile Stationery, but first let me just give you a bit of background to the assessment. The idea is to assess many software teams rapidly on a regular basis, like every 3 months, and to make the assessments really valuable to teams as part of their continuous improvement. So each team-focused assessment session is like a retrospective. It builds on the Spotify Squad Healthcheck approach, which is quite well known, but we're not just assessing team health. We do that, but we also look at continuous delivery, operability, testability, deployment, and flow. And it's really valuable. These additional dimensions on top of team health seem to be really valuable. So at Conflux, we've run these multi-team software delivery assessments for several large organizations over the past few years. And then since we published the format and details of the assessments, we've seen these being adopted by organizations in different parts of the world. And a key aspect of the assessment is that it scales to many, many different teams. And the way we do that is we use 2 facilitators in each session. One facilitator is actually facilitating the retrospective session, asking the questions, kind of stimulating conversation, that kind of thing. And the other facilitator is there to learn how to do that so that they can go and facilitate future sessions. So we can actually scale out the approach really, really quickly. The assessments can be run both in person, like in an office, or fully remotely. And these cards from Agile Stationery really help the assessment in either situation. I particularly like these voting cards, so like 1 to 5, that come in the pack. And you can use these in person or on a video call. For example, if we take one of the questions from the operability set, operability dimension, this is around system health, and it says, how do we know that the system is healthy or unhealthy? So the facilitator asks that question, and then people get to vote. And so there's a kind of a 5-star response and a 1-star response on the card here, so people can get a feel for where their team practices are. So if I hear that question and I hear the different criteria, if I think we're up at the 5-star response level, then I'll show this card. Obviously, can show it on a video call or just show it in person around a room. If I think we're actually not doing quite well, maybe I'll just show a 2 instead. So it's a nice way of getting to understand how the whole team sees the team practices around these different dimensions very quickly. So I'm really excited to have worked with Agile Stationery on this card deck. I think it's really awesome. I think it really helps to make the assessments work really smoothly, and kind of makes them a bit more interactive. I hope you enjoy using the assessment, and get in touch, send us a pull request on GitHub, and I hope it really works well for you using the card deck from Agile Stationery. So we created the MSDA model because we needed to assess more than 70 teams over a really short space of time to get a good understanding and baseline for the current practices, so we could then identify areas that needed cross-team and cross-supplier improvements. We also wanted to find any problems with the working environment, like platform processes, communications, leadership, decision-making, commercial contracts, all that kind of thing, if any of these were hampering good engineering practices. So the way we went about creating the model and choosing the books and things that form the base of the questions was, we started by thinking about the operational aspects of assessing more than 70 teams rapidly in a sustainable way. And actually the Spotify Squad Healthcheck approach seemed like a really good technique to adopt because loads of people have been using this technique around the world. We also like the way that the Spotify Squad Healthcheck emphasized team improvement and how it feels like a kind of retrospective session when it's being run. So then we characterized the current challenges in the organization where we were, and we looked for books that addressed these challenges. We looked for books with specific targeted recommendations for practices to improve engineering at multiple different levels. Obviously, each of the books that we've chosen has many different kind of recommendations, so we used our expertise to sort of zoom in and select a small subset of practices that would guide teams in the right direction, even though some specific practices had to be left out of the assessment because we couldn't cover everything that was in every book. At the time, I was engineering lead in this organization with more than 70 teams, and we had insights from lots of different areas of focus in the organization. So these insights help us to select the practices and assessment criteria that would actually apply most helpfully to the greatest number of teams and systems. And actually, after running these assessments many times in different organizations, I think the assessment criteria that we chose there actually work really well in general. So how does it work in practice? So it's worth pointing out that a really important aspect of the multi-team software delivery assessment is that the assessment helps teams to improve and helps the organization to improve. We're not there to compare or rank teams. At first, when we ran it at the very first time, some teams kind of were understandably suspicious of the assessment, especially like an outside consultancy coming in. But actually we took time. It's important to take time and care to explain and reassure people that the assessment's not there to punish or even reward teams, but it's actually to help all teams improve, looking for kind of cross-team or organizational weaknesses. Another thing that really helps with the kind of sustainability and adoption of this software delivery assessment is the way it's kind of like a viral facilitation model. So what does that mean? That in each retrospective session, each assessment session, with a particular team, we've got a facilitator, but then there's a second facilitator shadowing the main facilitator, and the second facilitator can then go and run 2 or more team assessments themselves somewhere else. So if you've got this kind of exponential growth, kind of viral growth of the ability to facilitate these sessions, and rapidly you can scale up to 70 or 100 teams or 500 teams very, very quickly by effectively training up the facilitator in each session. It's important that these facilitators are mostly from the organization itself. So the organization itself develops the capability to run its own assessments on an ongoing basis. And if you look at how often large, successful companies are doing this, typically it's about every 3 months you'll run one of these assessments, something like that kind of frequency. So like with many continuous improvement techniques, a really important aspect of the multi-team software delivery assessment is the conversations that happen as a result of the assessment. So conversations within individual teams and conversations across teams. For any kind of long-term improvement approach to be effective, the organization needs to give time for people to act on the realizations that they had in the session. So like make sure you're making space for lunchtime talks, mini showcases, communities of practice, internal tech conferences, external blog posts. All of these kind of things help to nurture and evolve a thriving engineering community that seeks to improve its practices over time. So combine these assessments, make sure they're on an ongoing basis, perhaps every 3 months, make sure that the capability is internal to the organization eventually, and combine these assessments with other practices to help kind of build a kind of sustainable approach to ongoing improvement in engineering practices throughout the organization.
Thank you, Matthew. Again, guys, any questions about Matthew's talk, fire away in the Q&A section. Right, so I think...
I'd like to hear if Benedict, because I think Benedict's fresh to that video as well, whether he had any like immediate reaction.
Oh God!
Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's what my reaction was. No, I'm obviously very familiar with the assessment and the methods. But it was nice to hear Matthew talk about doing it at scale. That I think for me is a very, very important part of this method, this way of working is it's not onerous, it's very lightweight. So it was nice to have that come across.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is a very useful part of the model. He talked a couple of times, didn't he, about the fact that it was developed for an organization with 70 teams, which I think is right at the top there in terms of scale, isn't it? Certainly bigger than anywhere I've worked. So that's it's good that it's achieved that sort of scale. Sorry, Dave, what were you going to say?
Oh no, I was going to want to ask you to talk about the deck, because Matthew's kind of touched on it and he's shown us a few cards. And one of the things we wanted to talk about is what is this deck of cards? How does it explain the model?
Right.
So, yeah, when you're ready, feel free.
I need to share a screen then. Let's see. Right. So yeah, I wanted to talk about a bit of the guts of the model, if you like, because it's one thing to say, okay, we can have an assessment, but I want it to make sense to you guys, and if I don't tell you what's in there, I feel it's not necessarily going to make sense. So yeah, to first cover something Matthew said at the end there about how this, or at the end of his initial segment, about how this makes it really easy to run the assessment. So how our product, the physical card deck, makes it easy to run an assessment. So we have some very simple ideas. For example, you could just merely wave it like this, and someone could write down the scores. You might have a spreadsheet on the side where a facilitator is taking that down. You could also just speak the numbers. That's fair enough. But there's one idea that we thought was quite compelling, which is where if you have everyone visible on your screen, and ideally that's possible if you've got a 6-person team, which is typical, then generally most video software will allow that. So you can imagine someone holding up the card on each of their in front of each of their cameras. And then the facilitator can simply take a screenshot of that, perhaps with one of the questions alongside. And then that's a record. So they could just be pasting into a document screenshots one after the other, and then they can do all the adding up actually offline. So that makes the actual session kind of uniquely fast, doing it that way. So that's kind of thanks COVID-19 for giving us a silver lining, and there's a way that's been developed to run it really quickly, perhaps quickly, more quickly than you could in a room, which is really interesting. So onto the guts of the model. So there's a whole bunch of different suits. I think one of the real strengths of this particular card deck is that it's really thorough. The content touches on such a broad range of things. 66 cards in total, so 66 success factors, as we like to call them, split over 6 suits. So the first, as hopefully you can see, is deployment, which is supposed to assess the awareness and practices of the team in relation to operability in terms of its readiness for production. And the way that it's doing that is it's actually capturing issues with consistency. So, for example, the rerun tests card talks about, can you rerun the test suite and get the same result twice? Now, a 5-star performance is that it does. It's no problem. You might even have a test that tests the or some sort of process that monitors the stability of tests and for flakiness. So that's a kind of a familiar problem. It's covered, and it's an important part of software delivery, but perhaps it's very familiar already to lots of you. A more surprising one is issues like, can you redeploy your application configuration from a repository and get a consistent result? That's something that you might have forgotten, I think. Likewise, if you redeploy the app, does it do the same thing every time? Hopefully most have got that one nailed. And can you actually blast your whole environment and rebuild from scratch from the pipeline? So I think having those things and having a high level of assurance around those things gets you to a new level. I think it's great that the deck captures that. Just trying to work out how to change slide. Okay, so testability. As a developer, we're probably very familiar with practices for developing code that's testable, having single responsibilities per class, being able to abstract dependencies behind interfaces, that kind of thing. So, and developing test first. So we have a card in the deck that captures exactly that. So that becomes part of your metrics. But then a more unexpected benefit is that you're covering are you covering the testability of your, sorry, are your tests actually testing the deployment behavior of your application? Does the orchestration of your deployment into production work as expected? Do you get the blue-green deployment happening? If you've got data having to be moved around at deployment time, like content of your CMS, for example, then that's a legitimate topic for conversation. Sorry, for testers to invest time in. And that was a surprise when I got to it in the model. I think that reflects quite a high level of performance. Oh, not looking to annotate anything here. So flow, based on the work by Nicole Ferguson, Jez Humble, and Jean Kim, and by Don Reinerson. And again, some really obvious things. So this one's from Accelerate. Are you achieving a low cycle time? Right. This is something that we talk about a lot. Again, captured in the model. So it's for sure covering all of your key things that you're perhaps already thinking about. And again, a prompt, something less surprising. So this is the flow suite, but it covers onboarding. So this is the onboarding of people into your team. Do you have a standard environment that you can spin up and give to them so that they can get coding exercises done, so coding tasks done? It's great to prompt teams to start thinking about these things and to track the development of that particular thing. So this is where it all started, actually, the team health. So this one comes from just 2 sources, one of which the original Squad Healthcheck. So where have I put that one? Never mind. So does it cover the, so that covers the original kind of 8 factors that were in Squad Healthcheck. But also this has been combined with Project Aristotle. So Project Aristotle is the one is the Google study that's famous for promoting the idea of psychological safety. So again, that's part of your model and something that you can assess and track in a lightweight way as part of this. And a more obvious example, does everyone know what they're doing? Have a clear understanding of their mission? Operability, perhaps what it's all about, sort of a focal suit of the product. It's got my favorite icon, showing the inner workings of a mill and capturing the theme by showing someone getting in there with a spanner and working on a system that looks like it might be moving still. So again, you know, it covers the obvious. Is your logging working? Are you actually seeing heartbeat log messages? Are they getting through? Are you able to analyze when they occur? Does changes in patterns of logged events, does that actually cause an alert? Does it do everything you expect it to do? Does it cover auditing features in the way that you want? But again, perhaps less expected. Are you spending enough money on it? You know, each target I think would be perhaps quite contextual to your organization. Maybe not everyone should spend 30%, might be a little bit more, might be a little bit less. But having a clear understanding of how you're spending money on operability and making sure that you're spending enough is again something that I think everyone needs to understand, and it's great that it's captured by the model. Okay, so the release continuous delivery is based on continuous delivery by Jez Humble and Dave Farley. Obviously a very important book. So you'll probably be familiar with issues like the production of release candidates, where every commit produces a release candidate, and that's captured, part of what you can measure. And then there's more subtle practices that people perhaps need to be reminded of on a regular basis, like the fact that they should get in and stop the line and stop developing new features if there's a problem with their pipeline. That's only happened to me a few times, doesn't happen often, but I think it's an important, although it did happen yesterday, it's an important sort of team behavior that leads to a much more stable environment, less chaotic environment where people can concentrate and get on. And I think that's a really well selected part of the model. So here's an example of how we could capture scoring. So one thing to notice in here is that individual responses are not even captured, they're not even written down. So that immediately gives people a sense of psychological safety around this. So their particular responses is not being recorded. Team is, but of course we're cautioned repeatedly not to compare teams, because one person's idea of good stop-line hygiene or effective automated configuration is, or a clear definition of done, is very different from another's. Some people might have just something written up on the whiteboard. Other people have got an extensive definition with lots of detail of what their definition of done is. So all you would do is capture the, you could capture the individual ratings. So you could capture the fact that you got two twos, 3 5s, and track then over time, was that more than the last time you did the assessment, or was it less? And I think it's important for any retrospective exercise or anything that seeks to replace or supplement a retrospective, that there's clear actions. So many times I've heard of software delivery assessment sort of suppressing actions a little, but I think it shouldn't be run that way. I think it's really important to have to allow space for a conversation and make sure that you get actions out of it right there in the session when people are thinking about what you've just basically prompted them to think about a thing, and if they have an insight, it's important you allow that to be captured and acted upon. Don't just accept that you're going to get a number and suppress that conversation that leads to improvement. everyone was agreed that scalability is an important aspect of this model, an important advantage. And one of the things you'll read on the GitHub, if you dip in there, is that a facilitator has a target. It's not particularly clear, a target of running just 2 sessions, but then also scaling this up to cover a large number of teams. So how does this work? So you can see on here, hopefully you can see my mouse. Can someone indicate whether you can see the mouse? Yeah, great. So you might imagine that this figure here in blue is your originator. So someone who's been on this call, brought the deck, done their research, is comfortable with the model, and they're responsible for deploying this. So the first session gets run by them with a shadow. If there's an organizational split between these 2 people, then this would be someone, as Matthew said, someone from inside the organization. So obviously you've got one person doing the work, one person learning. The following week, you've got those 2 people doing the work, 2 more people shadowing. The orange figure in week 3 will do 1 session. But for example, you've got your this person's come down to do work here. This person's being shadowed again, and that's fine. You can support more than a fixed number of people, and that's fine. And this person's working here. So with a little bit of flexibility, it works to scale up the number of people that you've got available to do facilitations, but each individual is not necessarily required to do a large number of sessions. So they're not going to be spending their whole life doing this. If they sign up to it, they might only do a couple of sessions a quarter. And as they develop, there'll be a big pool of people available to run them. I think that's quite an attractive feature of the system. Okay. Over to you, Devika.
Thanks, Simon. Well, I was going to say over to you, Ben. We've obviously talked about the model, what it is, and Simon's given us a good introduction to what's in the card deck, which is basically a great introduction to the model itself in a lot more detail. So Ben, yes, please share your experiences having applied this model in practice with some of your clients. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I will do, of course. Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm going to apologise in advance. There's a toddler somewhere around here. I don't think he's in this room, but he
There's nowhere else for them to be. It's fine.
And he will ignore me when I'm around and available, but as soon as he knows that I'm not available, he will make a noise. So if he hears my voice, then I apologise that the screaming isn't me, it's him. So hello, my name's Ben. I work for a company called Armakuni. I'm one of their principal consultants. And we work with all these types of organizations, so kind of big banks, small startups, educational institutions, governments, the Welsh government, the Office for National Statistics, the NHS in Wales. So kind of all kind of types of life that you get that create software. And as you're all well aware, every organization is different, and every team is different. And why is every team different? Well, it's because of this, this individual here, just a person, makes up a team member. They have their own aspirations, their own ambitions, their own views of what's good, what works, what doesn't work. They've got their own views of what drives them, what doesn't drive them. And then when they form part of a team, they have those interpersonal relationships that happen as part of a team. How they communicate, whether or not they share knowledge, all that good stuff. And then, as well as as the people in the team, an important part of the team is the processes that they follow and the tools. And then, so if you take an individual, a team, and there are lots of teams in an organization, there's a lot of variables, a lot of factors that go on. And then you've also got the outside influence of the team, whether that's colleagues, work that goes up and downstream, whether it's what's going on in the world right now. There's all this kind of stuff. But what we found is that most teams suffer from these types of problems. waiting around, defects, single points of failure, partially completed work, blah blah blah. But when we go into organisations and say, you will suffer from these things, they turn around to us and say, no, that's not true. We're all green. Everything's fantastic. It's great. But we'd like you to come do some work for us. We've got this legacy system sitting here somewhere. And what we'd like you to do is do something cool with it. Actually, one thing I'm going to add is that this legacy system, we haven't deployed it for 7 years. Or when we started building this system 10 years ago in the version of Java that we decided to use, that version of Java is now out of support, but the thing's live and we're now at massive risk. Blah blah blah. All this kind of stuff that's going. People are saying the teams are green. Where people are really enjoying themselves, doing great work. But this bad stuff. And actually, what we really want you to do is move it to Kubernetes or build it in Go or Rust or Circle CI or Google or AWS or blah blah. Azure, serverless, you name a technology. Rather than say, let's tackle the problem with the teams, let's tackle the individuals and the interactions. Let's deal with the software instead. And so when you get into a team, you're working with them. What you actually realise is that whilst it looks green on the outside, on the inside, it's actually red. And it's not really a team report, it's a watermelon. So how do you expose a watermelon? I really couldn't think of a better way of phrasing this slide, but how do you expose a watermelon? Well, the things that we looked at were things like organizational culture. So stuff, if you read Accelerate or Lean Enterprise or any of those types of books, where they talk about the Ron Westrum's typology of teams, how it's from a pathological, bureaucratic, or generative. So is our team or organization, power orientated? Is it rule orientated, or are we learning orientated? Are we generative? Trying to understand what the kind of like the typology of culture is like within the team, trying to understand what the cohesion of the team is like, maybe using like Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions. Do we trust each other? Do we have a healthy conflict, lack of commitment, accountability, etc.? Maybe we look at things like employee net promoter score. So how many people in the team are promoters of the team and how many are detractors? I will get onto the software delivery assessment in a minute. Don't worry, I'm not going off piece yet. But also things like the 4 key metrics from Accelerator or the State of DevOps report. Are the teams tracking these things? Do they actually know what they are? Do they exist? What are they like? All those things start to give you an indication of what's going on, what's happening. And other techniques and other exercises that we used were things like the stakeholder mapping, service blueprint. So stakeholder mapping, where you're saying, right, of all the people in your world, of all the teams in your world, can you chart them on impact and influence? How interested are they? How impactful are they on your work? Service blueprints. What's the work going through your team like from a customer point of view? What teams do you rely on to get their work done? Value stream mapping is a similar thing, but where you're looking at where are the bottlenecks, where's the flow, what's the percentage of complete and accurate that the work can go through. And something like a lean value tree, what's the work that we're doing? How is it relating to an organizational strategy? Do people understand the organizational strategy? Is it all coming together? Are we working on valuable stuff? So we've done all this stuff, and we're trying to understand what's going on in teams. And we were trying to do something around that Spotify health check. We were using something that Atlassian had put together, a health check thing, and we created our own version, where we picked a kind of a dozen or so criteria, and we made some statements. When it comes to lean management and monitoring, what's if this is a good statement or this is a bad statement, where do you rate yourselves as teams across the piece? And what we were finding was that each team believes they were different, and these things weren't quite fitting quite right. There was just something not quite good enough. So we went back to the drawing board, and we looked out into the world and said, what else is out there? And people like Medium, they've got some great blog posts on how they rate individuals, and they've got their kind of rubric around what based on where you are in an organization, what you should know and what your experience should be like. We've obviously got the Spotify model, the CRISP, the guys in Sweden who are doing, they talk about all their work. So I'll share the slides afterwards so you can dig into these more. But what we were finding was that they were too tailored to an organization, and they were too tailored to a specific team or a specific area. And late one night, I was kind of frustrated and just thought, sure, what I'll do is I'll search GitHub for team assessments, because that's what you do. You know, you search GitHub late at night. That's what everybody should all do. But bearing in mind, this was pre-COVID, so I should have been out somewhere else, but I or at least not doing this. Anyway, that's what I was doing. And I actually stumbled across the GitHub repo from Matthew's from Conflux, and I was aware of Matthew, and I knew the work that he did, and the founders of Armcooney have a personal relationship with him, I believe. So there was a kind of connection there already, and I was aware of the team topology book that was coming out. So I thought, well, there's definitely going to be some good stuff in here. And then as I started to read through it and looked at the kind of the foundational stuff, the as Simon mentioned, the books and the thinking that's been basically the Reader's Digest version of all those books it's been distilled into this thing. I was like, this is it, this is great, this is exactly what we need. It's got these 6 dimensions. They really closely map to how our world and how we believe software should be deployed. But it's also because of the Creative Commons license, we feel like, oh, if we need to slightly tweak or change things, drop stuff in, maybe look at something to do with data science, or go more kind of into SRE, we can do that without feeling too guilty. And we're currently honing those things at the moment, and we'll make pull requests and put those back into the community when we feel that they're good enough. So I think it was autumn last year that I first stumbled across this, and so since then delivered it in various different ways. We've been fortunate enough to do it face to face in the real world when we were allowed to do those sorts of things. We can still do it now with teams of less than 6, but we've done it as an online survey, all in one blast. Just sent an email out to people to see, does that work? Obviously, it's gone against the viral model, and it doesn't. It loses a certain amount of interactivity, but it loses a certain amount of the stuff that you get when you're doing it face to face, that contextual stuff. We've done it over Teams, Hangouts, Zoom calls. We're currently looking at, can we do it kind of as a Kahoot-esque quiz to see whether that works. We've not been fortunate enough to use these yet, plug, because they arrived pretty much just as lockdown started. So if anybody is out there and would like us to do it in anger, happy to run a session with somebody, if anybody's open for that. And so what's the benefit of this model? What does it give? Well, for the team, you can track your progress over time, like you can with that kind of Spotify Healthcheck. So you can see over time, are we doing things, and what are we doing to improve our ways of working? For an organization, depending on how comfortable you are with the kind of the granularity, you can go at a high level and say, well, if all the teams are roughly green, then it's roughly green in this area, or operability. So you can do it at that level. But what's really interesting is when you get into this area of, are there patterns across the data? Is there a dimension where we're really struggling? So if we look at this one at the moment, this is all auto-generated content because it's for various reasons, but the computer has decided that pawns or players, if you can see that across, there's some dysfunction in those areas. So maybe as a leadership team, if we're looking at this across the department, we can go in there and say, why do people not feel like we're they're players, they're part, they've got skin in the game. And I must caveat, and I think it's been mentioned a couple of times before, you can't use this to compare team A against team B against team C, and you can't use it. It's good that you can't see what individuals have voted for, but you can't compare. It's like comparing an apple with a penguin. Totally different. So some challenges that we found with it. Quite often we've gone into organizations and they've said, oh, we've tried the Spotify health model. We've done that. Why should we bother doing this again? So we're okay, I understand you tried the Spotify health model. Maybe just try this again, because it goes into a lot more detail. It's got a lot more thinking behind it. I'm not saying that Spotify model doesn't have thinking behind it. It's got a lot more in depth, especially when it comes to software engineering and especially when it comes to the techniques that engineers and developers should be using in their day-to-day. So give it a go there. We've also found that depending on the level of competence in the team, certain times, certain techniques people don't fully understand. They didn't even know they existed, or they should be practicing. They should be following them that way. So it starts to highlight and reveal. We tend to be seen. We move people from unconscious incompetence. We didn't know that thing existed, to more of conscious incompetence. We now know it exists. We just now need to understand how to do it. And another thing we found quite a lot is that there's this kind of, and I hate the phrase, but this peak of Mount Stupid, this aspect of, yes, we're doing that particular thing. We're doing unit tests, but are you doing test-driven development? Or when you say unit tests, what do you actually mean by unit tests? So, it turns out maybe they're doing Selenium tests or something different. So it does start to highlight where people maybe need some more training, a bit of education or re-education around what all this stuff means and what it looks like. And that's useful for us as consultants, to be able to go back to leadership teams and managers and people and say, we've run it with them. This is the results they've come up with, but where we think you might need some help is in these areas. I've not yet thought too much about how that translates into teams facilitating themselves and what it means for the kind of the viral nature of the model. And then beyond the assessment, you need to think about we've run the assessment, and then what do we do? How do we move forward? What do we do? And I'd say that you need to start to kind of pick things off. Run little experiments, right? So if we're red in this area, if we voted ourselves as a 1 or a 2 in a particular area, what can we do to move ourselves a point up? We believe that by doing this thing, we'll get this outcome, and we know we will have succeeded by doing this particular measurable strength. So there's a question I've just seen on the thing here as popped up in the corner of my eye. How long would it take each session, retrospective and average? So you've got a 6 to 9 person team. Would you recommend to define a time box for each session? Absolutely time box it. Do not just start at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning and keep going until you stop, because it could go on forever. There's actually in the GitHub repository, and I don't know whether it's in the card deck, there is a timing that says there is timings against each one. We found it's normally between 2.5 hours, depending on conversation, depending on what else comes out.
I've shared that with Moises.
Great.
I can share. I'll put the link on the chat as well, actually.
So my final point really was that once you've run these assessments, do a bit of work to improve yourselves. Put the improvement in. Don't just say, right, we're going to run this once a quarter and not do any work, not do any process work. Focus on process improvement or continuous improvement. And that's me. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Ben. That was very insightful.
Thank you. Yeah, very good.
Yes, it was also good to know how you discovered this model, what basically what problems you were trying to solve from your perspective, and how
I was doing late at night. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
I know. That's seems more relevant now, but yeah, you missed that.
Yeah. And what you said about not doing the right thing when you were still able to do it, that resonated as well.
Yeah, disappointed.
Absolutely.
Right. Ben, I had a question based on what you were talking about. We know this model in terms of, one of the objectives is to bring about sort of cultural change in an organization. It's not just about, improving a process at a particular point in time, or even team interactions at a particular point, but all together, put together, it's the idea is to bring about the cultural change, which works, sustainable and works longer term. Can you share? I suppose it's hard, given the timelines, the time it takes to bring about that change. But could you share an example of a scenario where you did notice change, or what is it that you're looking for when you want to measure the cultural change in an organization? How do you measure it? How do you know it's happening?
So cultural change is slow, like it can be glacially slow, and then suddenly there's a tipping point, and lots of things happen at once, and that's down to lots of reasons. It could be change in personnel, it could be some sort of crisis moment, a burning platform, something like that. So it's hard to say there's a definitive moment that the culture changed. But one piece of work that I was doing last year, we were working, it's a government department, and we were working very closely with them to embed what we call a cloud native way of working. So quite often organizations say, I'm going to buy the cloud, and that means we're going to spend a lot of money with Google or Amazon or Microsoft or whoever they've decided they're going to spend a lot of money with, and they're essentially going to lift their tin and the software they've got on the tin there and plump it in the cloud and go, right, we're in the cloud now, how great are we? And that if you're moving poor quality stuff, or stuff that's maybe been written at a time when quality was a different standard, it's you need to when you're moving to the cloud, you need to adopt a different mindset and a different frame of mind. So what we were trying to do was instill those things around continuous delivery, automate as much as you can, infrastructure as code, continuous deployment, continuous improvement, all that stuff. And so what we did, we took the whole organization through a training program of, this is basically a boot camp of this is what good looks like. And then once we did that, we then worked with them to try and embed it in each of the individual teams. And that's where a lot of the work that I talked about here came about, where we took a team culture check, we took a cohesion check, we did some work around the software delivery, how they rated stuff. But at the same time we were doing that, we had a shadow team. So we were consultants doing what consultants do, but then we also had a team with us who we were training and upskilling, and they were learning why, when you do that, why are you doing that technique? What's the benefit of that? And also kind of having a robust discussion with us to say, we don't agree, we don't want to do that. That's not a thing for us. Okay, fine, don't do it now. That's okay as well. You can do that. So they then the engagement ended, and we kind of came away, and then over the summer they contacted us again saying, can you come back in and help us again? We've been continuing the work, and we've been doing what you set up to help us do. Now we want you to come in and sit with specific teams and really just kind of give it as an example. So that was a great thing for us, because what we've set up and what we've been doing, they'd taken on and they'd continued that, and they'd scaled it out themselves. They'd put it into their communities of practice, so they could talk about, there's that cross-pollination of teams when they're talking about those things. So that's one example. I mean, yes, like I say, it's difficult to give concrete examples of we changed an organization overnight.
Yes, and also I suppose Sharman, you shared the sheet where you capture the assessment results. As you say, Ben, with this approach, you're able to record the as is in quite an objective way, without obviously naming people and all that. It's you get a good view of the current state of the organization along all those dimensions, which all put together do to quite an extent define the culture of that organization. And then you can look at that and compare it over time in 3-6 months time and see how you've done. So yes, I can see how that recording of assessments and tracking that can give you a good view of how things are changing, if at all. But okay, yeah, that sounds good. We have another question, I think, from Moses. If you guys can see it, he's talking about, would this assessment be useful for senior executives? I see this very helpful to learn about team maturity, but would this be something to share outside the team?
Yes, you can share outside the team. What you shouldn't do is compare teams. So the reason you don't compare teams is because the flavour of an apple is not comparable to the flavour of a penguin, as Benedict slightly pointed out. I noticed you didn't read that bit out. I wonder why. I liked it. So it's basically unfair to compare teams when the criteria is really subjective. So one thing stuck in my mind when we did Squad Healthcheck when I was working as a developer at the Financial Times. So we thought we were a good team. We thought the work was fun. We were enjoying what we were doing. It was a relatively supportive organisation. There was a few experiments with reorganisations that went well and came back to a good standard. But I remember we were playing a session of it was the standard Squad Healthcheck with the paper cards printed out, and someone said we basically all said that fun was green. It was green or maybe it was amber. One person played red, and we stopped and we did the kind of the planning poker thing, focusing on the outlier. So, do you mind telling us why you said red for that? And they just said, well, we never go out for a drink. So we were having fun while at work. We were enjoying the work. We were invested in the work. We had a good banter around the table, but we didn't go out. And that was part of her definition of what fun looked like in a team. So we all changed our mind. The people that were green went orange, right? Because that was accepted as a learning point. So that's why it's unfair to compare, because that sort of thing is going on every different aspect of work. People don't actually know what good looks like, and their own understanding of what good looks like can evolve over time. So they can go from green to orange. It's not actually because things have gotten any worse. It's because they've learned something interesting. So comparisons between teams is to be avoided. But where I see executives using the data is particularly if they see something that's becoming across multiple teams becoming more negative over time, or something which at a point in time across multiple teams is red or orange, so it's showing negative scores. So that means that organization-wide, because of multiple teams involved, there's a weakness. So, for example, if we don't really know anything about blue-green deployments, we're not up to speed with DevOps culture and tool chains, we're not cloud native, then we might want to invest in some training, just like the kind of training that you were describing. That would allow you to boost that up, and you'd expect then that the standard to wobble around as well, and different signals to come out of that, as some people might go from green to orange because they've had the training and now they know what good looks like. But hopefully over time you'd see red becoming green, or ones becoming fives in the MSDA model. Do you want to add anything, Benedict?
I'm actually looking at the deck. So it is an assessment. It is an assessment for software delivery teams. So if people are not writing code or delivering code in some way, then it's going to be difficult for them to answer the questions. So if your question is, would this be useful for senior executives to partake in? I would say that aspects of it are. The team health bit there's quite a lot of questions there that could help them. It would be good to take them through it so that they have a comprehension of what some of these techniques are, so that when people are being asked for budget to refactor or rework some stuff, they understand what it means rather